Om Tava Kathamritam Tapta Jeevanam Kavibhirividam Kalmashamapam Sravanamangalam Srimatavantatam Bhuvigranantiti Bhuritanjana. Now we are beginning this session, a discussion on this well-known spiritual classic, the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. As an introduction to this topic, I shall make a few preliminary observations. First of all, the central theme of this work is very simple: how to lead a spiritual life while living in this world. How to practice spirituality when we work in our everyday life situations, in our homes, offices, workplaces, factories, whatever may be our profession, whatever walk of life we may belong to, we can lead a spiritual life. Sri Ramakrishna makes this point very clear. To lead a spiritual life, we need not run away from the everyday life situations. We can practice spirituality, lead a spiritual life, even while living in this world. When we are engaged in our day-to-day activities, performing our responsibilities and duties, we can lead a spiritual life. That's the central theme of the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. There's a special reason why Sri Ramakrishna focuses on this subject. If you read the introduction to the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, translated by Swami Nikhilananda, and if you read the life story of the chronicler, the recorder of Sri Ramakrishna's instructions, you will understand its relevance. Because Mahendra Nath Gupta, the chronicler, the recorder of Sri Ramakrishna's instructions, was himself an householder living in this world. He was an extremely well-educated person. Not very wealthy, but certainly not very poor. But had a very big joint family, an extended family. You have to remember one important thing. He was himself a postgraduate of the later half of 19th century. Now, such a well-educated man would naturally have got a very good job in those days. But in his case, he did not get a very well-paying job. And again, in spite of being endowed with so many spiritual qualities, intellectual qualities, a highly accomplished man, judging by the standard of worldly achievements, his family life was very unhappy. And it was very difficult for him in later years even to get a job. Sometimes an interesting topic is brought out in discussion on any spiritual topic. What is the relationship between grief, unhappiness, or tragic events in our life and spiritual life? Is there any invisible link, a connecting link between failure in secular life and spiritual life? This question is often raised. Now, very often you find people who had some tragic experiences in their secular life, family life, suddenly take a turn to spirituality. compelled by circumstances. But here we have to remember, all people under such circumstances do not turn to spiritual life. So they must have some intrinsic, inherited qualities within them that enable them to turn to a spiritual life. In Yam's case, it was something very interesting. Extremely well-educated man, highly respected, and he had very good family connections. He had married a distant cousin of one of the most famous intellectuals of Calcutta at that time, Keshav Sen, who was the most prominent leader of the Brahma Samaj of that time. Now, in spite of these important connections, extremely very good education, he could not get a very well-paying job, and his family life was very unhappy. And one day, almost it was midnight, this man leaves his home. Compelled by the domestic wranglings, his relations and relatives quarreling among themselves for petty favors, for position, for a higher share of their family property and so on. So they were totally different, at least some of them were quite different in temperament from Yam himself. Yam, please remember, Yam is the short name of Mahendra Nath Gupta, who was born in the year 1854 and who came in contact with Sri Ramakrishna in the year 1882, most probably in February 26. That's the chronological dates. So this man one day leaves his home about midnight. He became so depressed and he was thinking of committing suicide. And seeing the condition of her husband, his wife also started and joined him. They moved about the streets of Calcutta, and finally, after a long struggle, it was midnight, not easy to get horse carriages at that time. But anyway, he had to face a lot of difficulties. Finally, he reached the home of his nephew. His nephew's name is sometimes mentioned, Siddheswara Majumdar, you find in Yam's life. So remember, when this whole scene, an extremely well-educated person was highly respected in among the social elites of the city, who would have, under normal circumstances, could have got a very, very good lucrative job under the East India Company, which was ruling Bengal at that time. This man did not had a good luck to get a very good job and acquire a lot of wealth, because he was devoted to study, intellectual engagements, reading books, and doing his duty as a role model school teacher. So, compelled by circumstances, he leaves at midnight and accompanied by his wife, he reaches the home of his nephew. That nephew was living very close to a well-known temple, it's Dakshineshwar temple, where Sri Ramakrishna was living. But at that time, Yam had not heard of Sri Ramakrishna. Next day morning, his nephew told him, well, why can't we go about the city, come with me for a walk, we can move from place to place. There used to be garden, small gardens and houses and streets along the banks of Ganga, and both the nephew and uncle, Yam Mahendra Nath Gupta and his nephew, both together started walking. Finally, they reached the Dakshineshwar temple garden where Sri Ramakrishna was living. And when he reached the temple, his nephew again told him, you know, there is a well-known Paramahamsa, a saint, living in this temple garden. We can go and see him. Yam agreed. Both of them went and had one glance standing at the doorsteps of the room where Sri Ramakrishna was living. They just glanced into the room and found a middle-aged man with a short beard was talking about God, spiritual life, renunciation, and finding solutions to our everyday problems in life. Yam thought, well, this is a very wonderful man. He is talking about some very important and useful topics. So he was very much drawn towards, very much impressed. He came out and went round. He wanted to see the place where they had reached. And after going around the temple, again they returned to Sri Ramakrishna's room. And an attendant was, an old lady was standing outside. With her permission, they entered the room, and that is how Sri Ramakrishna Sri Ramakrishna happened to see for the first time his future disciple and his future chronicler. Now, there are a few very important ideas from a spiritual point of view that we have to learn from this incident. Sometimes we feel in secular life, in domestic life, sometimes we feel that these domestic problems are great obstacles in spiritual life. First, we must set right our domestic problems. Sometimes people will tell you, well, first you do your duty, first you achieve something in this world, then think of God. First you establish yourself in this world, then turn to spirituality. But actually, if you read the lives of great saints and sages, you'll find very often great tragedies and unhappy incidents in domestic life sometimes become a great blessings in disguise. They open the doors to a higher spiritual life. This happened to innumerable spiritual seekers. In Yam's case, his meeting with Sri Ramakrishna was the beginning of a new chapter in his life. The man who was thinking of putting an end to his physical life got a spiritual dimension to his personality. In fact, it's the beginning of his spiritual life. And later, he became one of the most devoted followers of Sri Ramakrishna. And not only that, some of Sri Ramakrishna's future monastic disciples were introduced to Sri Ramakrishna through this great devotee, Mahendra Nath Gupta. I will just begin with the first chapter. Now, I am reading from not from the main book, not from the translation of Bengali Gospel into English by Nikhilanandaji, but this happens to be a special work. So I would like to begin today's class with reading a few pages from this book. Condensed Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, Section 1, Sri Ramakrishna a Dictionary. Now we have to remember, Yam himself tried and thought of translating all of Sri Ramakrishna's instructions from original Bengali into English. In fact, how he happened to record Sri Ramakrishna's instructions, I shall say a few things about this. He had a wonderful memory. So every day after visiting his teacher, Sri Ramakrishna, he used to write down in his diary all that he heard and saw during his conversation, during his meeting with Sri Ramakrishna. And mind you, in those days, all types of people came to visit Sri Ramakrishna. Among them, there were great scholars, traditional conservative scholars. There were well-educated modern agnostics, people who are not willing to believe in any kind of spiritual tradition, or who were agnostic about the existence of God. And there were young students, and there were also old ascetics, monks and wandering mendicants who used to visit Dakshineshwar temple during their travels in that part of the country. So among the visitors who happened to meet Sri Ramakrishna were agnostics, atheists, non-believers, conservative, God-fearing, orthodox people, mendicants, householders, and mind you, in fact, the person who for the first time referred to Sri Ramakrishna to Swamiji was himself an Englishman, probably an Irish gentleman, W. Hasty, who was the principal of the Anglican college. Is called that was a college where Swamiji was studying, Scottish Church College, which was run by the Church of England. He was a prominent writer on Victorian English literature, English literary criticism. So his name was William Hasty. It was this William Hasty who for the first time talked about Sri Ramakrishna to Swami Vivekananda. And it also happened as some kind of an accident. He was teaching William Wordsworth's famous work, it's called Excursion, where he speaks about some kind of transcendental experience which he called trance. Now, Hasty remarked that this is an experience which we normally cannot explain in words. It is something that we can only experience but cannot be explained. What Wordsworth must have experienced, we do not know, but he was some kind of a pantheist who believed in the divinity of external nature, who equated the phenomenal world, phenomenal nature to God himself. He was a great nature lover. So, a word which William Wordsworth used happened to be explained as some kind of a samadhi by an Irish professor who happened to be the teacher of English literature in Scottish Church College, was Swami Vivekananda. At that time, Narendra Nath was a student. That is how the great Swami Vivekananda himself came to know about Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa. We do not know when Mr. Hasty might have visited Dakshineshwar temple, when he might have seen Sri Ramakrishna personally. But anyway, it shows that all types of people, many of them not well educated, some of them great scholars, conservative Orthodox Sanskrit Pandits, wandering mendicants, and young students, modern social reformers like A.C. Chandrasen, all of them used to visit Dakshineshwar temple. But what Sri Ramakrishna taught them, what all instructions he gave them, we have no idea. Whatever we have got, we get from this great spiritual classic, the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, for which we are eternally indebted to this great saint, Mahendra Nath Gupta, who is known as Yam in the context of Ramakrishna Mission literature, in the Gospel and other books. That's the story. When Swami Vivekananda himself first saw some of the manuscripts which Yam had translated from Bengali into English, Swamiji wrote a letter to him. I shall read it out. But before that, I shall give a few more hints as to how this book took its present shape. So Yam used to write down all that he heard from Sri Ramakrishna, all the conversations that took place in Sri Ramakrishna's room, in his diary, in Bengali language, not in English, which he later published as Sri Ramakrishna Kathamrita. It's a Bengali title. Now, At that time, we didn't have much much information about Sri Ramakrishna's instructions, especially for those who were English, those who did not know Bengali. They had no way of reading the original teachings of Sri Ramakrishna. Max Muller published some essays, and some prominent writers of India and European countries also wrote something about Sri Ramakrishna. But the detailed record of Sri Ramakrishna's instructions was not available. But Yam brought out all this in 5 volumes, which came to be known as Sri Ramakrishna Kathamrita in Bengali language. Then he wrote some of them in English language. In a way, this is not a literal translation of what he himself wrote in Bengali language, a kind of reproduction in English language. So the language is a bit archaic, somewhat Victorian 19th century English. But I thought it's very appropriate for us to begin with a few pages from the condensed Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, which happens to be Yam's own translation of his own Bengali recordings in English. Of course, not a literal translation, but a free translation. So, section 1, Sri Ramakrishna Dakshineshwar, 1882, chapter 1. The first meeting with the Master. It is the spring of 1882, the season of flowers and of the sweet southern breeze. The sun is about to set on the temple of the Mother of the Universe one pleasant day in the month of March. According to later historians who analyzed the events of that period, this happened in 1882 February, but there is we need not bother much about minor differences. All nature smiles and rejoices. At such a time came about Yam's first vision of the God-man. The temple of the Mother, where Sri Ramakrishna has made his abode for years, is on the eastern bank of the Ganges in the village of Dakshineshwar, about 4 miles north of Calcutta. He is sitting on the lounge, the smaller of the 2 bedsteads, in his own chamber, which looks out on the sacred waters of the holy stream, the Ganga, as it flows past. Ganga is a sacred river, holy river, which flowed past the temple. The temple was constructed by Rani Rasmani. Most probably the construction was over in 1854 or 55, around that time. It was constructed along the banks of river Ganga by a prominent rich lady of the place. Her name was Rani Rasmani. The disciples and other devotees are seated on the floor. Now Sri Ramakrishna's room was like this. There were 2 courts, one small, the other big. Mostly while engaged in conversation with his disciples, he used to sit on the lower court and discuss God, spirituality, scriptures, and so many, all spiritually related topics with his disciples and visitors. They look on his benign, smiling face and drink the nectar of the living words that fall from his hallowed lips. Facing the east and smiling, the Master talks of the Lord. Now, Yam has reached the doorsteps of Sri Ramakrishna, accompanied by his nephew. This is the man who left his home at midnight the previous night, along with his wife, almost decided to put an end to his life because of his domestic worries and problems and domestic quarrels. So he reached the doorstep of Sri Ramakrishna's room. He's looking inside. Yam looks in and stands speechless. Yam wonders if it is Sukadeva before him that talks of the Lord, Shukadeva was a great saint and sage who was the exponent, the teacher of the great spiritual classic known as Bhagavata Purana, which narrates the life and teachings of Lord Sri Krishna. Is the most important devotional classic of Vedantic tradition. To give an example of Shukadeva and his place in devotional literature, and why and how Yam happened to think of the Shukadeva. I shall just try to explain the background. In ancient times, it is said there was a great emperor, a king. His name was Parikshit. He was a noble king, but by mistake, he happened to commit a terrible sin. One day he was hunting in the forest to protect the saints and sages doing penance in the forest hermitages. It was the duty of kings and emperors in those days to kill wild animals. He used to come and destroy the hermitages and kill the wandering mendicants and saints and sages. This is a tradition. So this king was moving about in the forest, and then he reached a hermitage where a saint was sitting immersed in meditation. But the king was hungry and thirsty, so he misunderstood the saint's reticence, silence as a kind of indifferent attitude towards him. He expected the saint to get up from there and honor him and offer him drinking water. That's what he expected. But the saint was immersed in meditation, so the king couldn't understand that. What he did, he took a dead snake and threw the body of a dead snake on the neck of the saint and went away. And later on, when the saint's young son came, he became very furious. He cursed the king for committing this heinous sin. And later on, of course, the saint, when he opened his eyes and came to know what happened, he was very much upset. He sent information to the king about this curse. The curse was this: you will die. On the seventh day, you will die. You will be beaten by a poisonous snake. That was the curse. Now, when the king came to know of the terrible sin that he had committed and the curse that accompanied his act, he did not become upset. He did not become annoyed. What he did, he left his kingdom, his comforts, his palace, and went to the banks of Ganga, river Ganges, and there he decided that he will sit in meditation for 7 days, waiting for his death. Now, when the great saints and sages of the area came to know that, they came to meet him. Among them, there was one great saint. His name was Shukadeva. That's the great saint Yam is referring to. When Shuka, the great saint, reached the hermitage where the king was sitting in penance on the banks of Ganga, the king put a question to him: what should a dying man do? Atha prichami samsiddhim yoginam paramam gurum purushasyeha yatkaryam riyamanasya sarvata. This is a question is put. What should a dying man do? The king knew that he had only 7 days to live. So he asked how I should meditate, whom I should pray to, how I should lead my spiritual life. What should a dying man do to get spiritual illumination? In answer to this, Shuka replied, Edavan Sankhya-yoga-bhyam sudharma parinishthaya janma labha parapumsam ante narayana spruti. You should be able to leave this world with God's name in your lips and God's form in your mind. Ante Narayana Smriti. You should be able to leave this world remembering God. That should be the supreme goal of human life, human existence. This you can do either through Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, the path of knowledge, the path of action, the path of devotion, and whatever may be. So, when Yam saw Sri Ramakrishna instructing his disciples, engaged in spiritual conversation with his visitors, suddenly Yam's mind went to the scene that took place 7,000 years earlier, when the great Shukadeva was instructing King Parikshit on how to lead a spiritual life so that one can leave this world in a spiritual way. So not only life, death also can be made spiritual. So that's what Yam is talking to. So Yam looks in and stands speechless on the doorstep. Yam wonders if it is Shukadeva before him that talks about the God. Yam feels as if he was standing on a spot to which have come together the various holy places of pilgrimage to hear the divine preacher that is seated before him. Sri Ramakrishna speaks, saying that this is what Yam hears for the first time. Suppose at the name of the Lord your hair stands on end, and tears of joy start from your eyes. Verily, I say unto you, the term is over of your work for the Lord. Remember, it's an old style of language. Yam was educated most probably in the 1870s or 60s, mind you. So I especially have a liking for this work because it is a translation, it's an interpretation of Yam's own hand on Sri Ramakrishna's instructions. So here Sri Ramakrishna says, how long should you work in this world? Is work the end of human life? Sri Ramakrishna says, work should not be the goal of human life. It can be the beginning, but it should not be the end. So, work is a means. When does work become a means for a higher goal? And what is the goal? The goal is spiritual illumination, realization of God. But is that possible by working? Normally we work. When we do our work, there is always an invisible link between what we do and what beneficial results that we expect from that work. There is always an invisible connecting link. Unless we break this link, work cannot even become a means for a higher spiritual goal. Work becomes a means for higher spiritual goal when work is combined with devotion, contemplation, and non-attachment or unselfishness, without any obsessive attachment to the result of what we are doing. So, Sri Ramakrishna says, if work is performed without attachment and as an offering to God, as an act of God, then at one point we will be able to tell ourselves, well, now I need not worry much about work, I can think of God. That's what Sri Ramakrishna says. So he says, suppose the name of the Lord, at the name of the Lord your hair stands on end, or tears of joy start from your eyes. Those who are great mystics who spend all their lifetime thinking of God, and for whom every act is an act of worship, every thought is an act of meditation. Whole life becomes a spiritual sadhana, spiritual practice. where secular life merges with the spiritual, where spiritual life alone exists. For such people, even when they utter the name of God, their hair stands on end. And when that point is reached, then there is no need to work anymore. I say unto you, the term is over of your work for the Lord. For instance, the daily service, morning, noon, evening, lay down for the twice born. Now, the meaning is this. At the beginning of our spiritual life, we go to temples, churches, synagogues and so on. We read scriptures on special occasions. We perform some formal spiritual practices. At this stage, it's a formal spiritual practice. But when we reach the experience level, then every moment becomes a spiritual practice. Every act becomes a spiritual practice. There is no need to engage oneself in formalistic spiritual practice. See, normally 1 or 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours in the evening, and maybe on special days going to Vedanta societies, churches or temples or synagogues, reading scriptures. This is necessary, this is a must. But at the same time, this, when done with great concentration, will take us to the next state of spiritual experience. Sri Ramakrishna is not condemning formalistic worship because it is very, very important and very much necessary. Sometimes when we read these books, sometimes we may think, well, I would rather go to the highest level, the beginning itself. That is a terrible mistake. In spiritual life, we don't have a choice. Just like a small boy, he said sometimes, a small boy asked his father, who was teaching in a university, do you practice your alphabet every day? Do you write your alphabet every day? Because he had to do that. The child is forced to do that maybe in the kindergarten. So he thought his father also has to do. Father said, well, I don't have to do it. Then I would rather go to the university and teach. Why should here, if I go to the kindergarten, I have to practice writing this alphabet every day. Maybe memorization in some places. There is no choice in spiritual life. We have to begin with external ritualistic worship, external practices. And when that is done with great concentration, then we will evolve the next state of spiritual life. That's what Sri Ramakrishna says. When this state of the soul is reached, the devotee need only repeat the name of the Lord. That's why Sri Ramakrishna, if you read the Gospel, you find Sri Ramakrishna as an instruction for everyone. As I said, among his visitors, there were great spiritual sadhaks, great spiritual seekers, highly elevated spiritual seekers, like Swami Vivekananda and great Keshavachandra Singh and so on. And there were great scholars and atheists. In fact, his doctor himself was an agnostic, Dr. Sarkar. He didn't go to the temple and pray there, but Sri Ramakrishna was quite felt at home with him also. He also got something from Sri Ramakrishna. Some businessmen also came. For example, some Marwari businessmen came to Sri Ramakrishna. And they were still dominating the entire commercial, financial activities of the city of Kolkata. In those days, it was much more so. This Marwari businessmen came to Sri Ramakrishna. They asked, see, we are all business people living in this world. Can we attain God? What answer will you give? Business people. You can't tell them you close your shops and you start thinking about God. But then they will never come again. Because they will immediately conclude that spirituality and religion are of no use to them, not of much practical use to them. They want some instruction which they can practice at their level. So Sri Ramakrishna would tell them, you do your work, do your business, but once in a while, you go to a lonely place, you go to a place of worship, you meet some holy man or woman, talk to them about spirituality, and so on. That will slowly help you in leading a spiritual life, while at the same time being engaged in your business activities. Now, Sri Ramakrishna's approach was essentially positive. What he did was, he gave a lift to the next stage of spiritual evolution. Anybody who went to him for a problem got a solution. Nobody went empty-handed. Whatever problems they had, Sri Ramakrishna gives some solution depending upon their own state of mind. So, he says, for the highest spiritual seeker, when that person transcends the realm of work, then he can spend all his lifetime thinking about God. Again, says the Master, Sandhya ends in Gayatri, Gayatri in the simple Om. Needs a little philosophical explanation. Now, in Vedantic spiritual evolution, the highest stage is experience. Experience of the individual soul with the universal supreme reality. Called Jiva Brahma Aikyam, it is called. The union between the individual soul and the universal soul. This is the supreme goal of spiritual life. This is the highest spiritual experience. It is not a belief, it is not a doctrine, it is an experience which is beyond words. But below this level, there are different levels of evolution below this stage. So, just below this stage is Omkara. Omkara, that's what Sri Ramakrishna says. See, Sandhya ends in Gayatri, Gayatri in the symbol of Om. Sri Ramakrishna here begins Sandhya. Sandhya here means formal ritualistic worship. In Vedantic tradition, Vedic tradition, it means formalistic worship or ritual that is normally performed in the morning and evening at the junction of night and day. Early morning, dawn and dusk. This is the formal worship. That's in most religious traditions. This is insisted. The morning and evening, you must pray to God. You must, or any kind of formal rituals. That is something. Now, Gayatri is the most sublime and the highest mantra, Vedic mantra. So Gayatri is the name of a meter, and also it is the most sublime, the supreme Vedic mantra, a Vedic verse. It is said that Gayatri is the essence of all the Vedas. Here, Vedas here means all the philosophical, theological ideas and practices contained in the Vedic literature. So Gayatri, the essence, the gist of the entire Vedic literature. What Sri Ramakrishna says is this. First we begin with Sandhya, formal worship, external rituals. And when we go beyond this, we reach the level of Gayatri. For the highest spiritual seekers, there is no need for them to practice the external rituals. It is enough for them to recite Gayatri. But if Gayatri is the essence and gist of the entire Vedic literature, Om, the Omkara, is the gist of Gayatri itself. Because Omkara, the Pranavam we call, it is explained in the Mandukya Upanishad. It is the gist of all spiritual knowledge, all spiritual experiences, all spiritual ideas. Uma. And it is also the condensed essence of all human experiences during the waking state, dream state, and dreamless or deep sleep state. It is the beginning, is the middle, and the end, and the essence of all knowledge, Om. But this Om is also a symbol. It is not a word, it is a symbol. It is also a symbol of a higher experience. An experience can never be the same as the symbol. For example, a glass of water cannot be the same as the glass of water itself. A paper, the word paper is only symbol. The paper is the reality, of which the word paper is a symbol. Similarly, Om is a symbol. Om is a symbol of the highest transcendental experience. That is what is mentioned in this book. What Sri Ramakrishna says is this: as we evolve from gross to subtle, from external to internal, from many to one, as we grow in our spiritual life, slowly, as we move towards experience, leaving behind mysticism, mythology, theology, and rituals, everything ends in silence. Silence is the last, ultimate, and final goal of spiritual life. Om is not silence. Om is only an attempt to explain the inexplicable thing, which is silence. Because the language of experience is silence. It's a famous mantra is the Rigveda, Antaya Behuvadinam Anantaya Mukam, which means the language of the infinite is silence. So Sri Ramakrishna says the supreme goal of all human endeavor, all spiritual practices, is finally to reach this goal. But at the same time, we have to remember, reading this, we should not assume that we have reached that goal. In fact, that's a very big problem when we read scriptures, unless we understand this very clearly. In scriptures, we intellectually understand some of the highest spiritual truths. But so long as we have not reached the experience level of those truths, it is not real for us. It remains a goal for us to attain, not something that we have already attained. So that's the point which Sri Ramakrishna says. Yam is silently listening to all this. Yam intellectually understands this. See, Yam himself is an example. Yam was very well versed not only in Oriental philosophy but also Occidental Western philosophy. Yam had almost memorized the whole of King James version of Bible. It is said in his. And he had close connection with Brahma Samaj, which had some doctrinal connection with the Unitarian Church, Unitarian movement, Unitarian universalistic ideas. So Yam was not only familiar with Vedanta philosophy, Vedic philosophy, but also with Western philosophical and religious traditions. Still, remember, he was running away from his home, thinking of putting an end to his physical life. So it means philosophy is not enough for us to be of any help in you. Philosophy or ideas will not come to help. Yam is coming to Sri Ramakrishna, who have not heard of Kant or Hegel, which Yam was familiar with. And it was Sri Ramakrishna who gave him a new life. So Yam, who was such a well-versed educationist, highly respected headmaster, who was well-versed in Sanskrit, English language, who was not only familiar with Brahma Samaj, modern reform movements, traditional Hinduism, and also different denominations of Christianity. Such a man did not get spiritual food from all these systems of philosophy. And he had to come to Sri Ramakrishna, who gave spiritual food, not intellectual food. And he gave a new life. That's why when this great scholar stood on the doorsteps of Sri Ramakrishna, listening to Sri Ramakrishna's words, he himself writes, Yam stands speechless. These are Yam's own words. Yam himself wrote these English sentences. He thinks within himself, how charming is this place. The place is, mind you, a small room where Sri Ramakrishna was living. A small room with two small courts. There was not much furniture there. Very small place, people used to come. Some of them were wandering monks, some of them mendicants. All sorts of people used to come and listen to Sri Ramakrishna and used to get some spiritual food. Nobody went empty-handed. Nobody went away empty-handed. So Yam himself writes, Yam stands speechless. He thinks within himself, how charming is this place? What a man! How sweet and charming are his words. The very idea of leaving this place troubles the soul. But let me first look about and form a clear idea of the temple. Yam did not enter the room even now. Listen for a few minutes perhaps with his nephew. Then he decides, let me see what place I have reached. So he wanted to go about the temple and find out exactly where he has reached. They were walking from place to place, wandering from one garden to another garden on the banks of Ganga. I will then come back and sit at his feet. Yam comes out of the room. Maybe he has adjusted into the quadrangle. He begins to visit the temples of God the Father, of God incarnate as love, and lastly that of God the Mother. So there are temples. The most important temple is the temple of the Divine Mother, Bhavatarini, Kali, and there are other temples, Shiva temples, 12 Shiva temples, Radhakrishna temples. All these Yam visited. At that time, Vesper service was going on the temple. It's just evening, the time of divine service. Priests are waving the lights before the sacred images, the accompaniment of bells, cymbals, and drums. From the southern end of the temple garden is wafted upon the soft southern breeze sweet music, melody after melody played by the temple orchestra upon the flageolets and other instruments. This is traditional temple music is being played. That music is carried far off the bosom of the Gangas until it is lost in the distant immensity. Yam's joy is full at the blessed sight. Now, Sidhu speaks to Yam saying, his nephew tells him, reminds him, this is Rasmani's temple. Here the gods are ministered unto from day to day, from morning till night. Here too holy men and the poor are daily fed out of the offerings made to the deity. The two friends went their way through the grand quadrangle back towards Sri Ramakrishna's chamber. Coming up to the door of the room, they noticed that it is closed. So they went around the temple, went around, saw the different temples in that courtyard. And finally they returned to Sri Ramakrishna's room. They were walking back to Sri Ramakrishna's room. Coming up to the door of the room, they noticed that it is closed. Yam has learned English etiquette and thinks it will be rude to try to enter without leave. So in those days, those with some English education were so proud of their, at least, external practices. So he waited outside. Without permission, he would enter. So incense was burned a little while before. At the door stands Brinda, the maidservant. Yam talks to her. So an aged maidservant is employed by the temple to stand outside when the door is closed. To admit those who want to meet Sri Ramakrishna. Yam, well, my good woman, is he in, the holy man? Yam is asking Brinda, is Sri Ramakrishna in? She said, yes, he's inside this room. Yeah. How long has he made his abode here? Brinda, oh, many, many years. I suppose he has read many books. He has many books to read and study. Yam thought that Sri Ramakrishna was like himself, reading all sorts of philosophical, theological books. That was his idea. Because Yam's idea of knowledge was intellectual knowledge, information that we gather with intellect, reading books, listening to lectures. That was the only concept of knowledge which Yam could think of, because he was himself an intellectual, a bookworm. So he thought Sri Ramakrishna must have a huge stock of books in his room which must be busy reading from time to time. But Brinda corrected him. Oh dear, no, not a single one. His tongue talks everything, even the highest truth. His words come from above. Yam is fresh from college. He is told the master is not a scholar. Then how can he speak all this? As I said, Yam's understanding, his concept of knowledge was the knowledge that we get from books or from lectures and so on. He could not think of higher knowledge, knowledge that comes out of one's own intimate spiritual experience. And he was surprised, he was almost shocked. At this he stands aghast, speechless with surprise. Yeah, very well. Is he now going on with his evening worship? May we come in? Will you be so kind as to tell him that we are anxious to see him? Thereupon they enter the room. No other people there. The master is seated alone on the smaller of the two bedsteads. The master makes many kind inquiries. What is your name? Where do you live? What are you? What has brought you to Baranagar? Etc. Some of the questions put to Yam. Yam answers all these questions. So this is Yam's first direct encounter with Sri Ramakrishna. So we'll continue this discussion tomorrow. Now we will have interaction, questions and answers, half an hour.
Swami, you spoke of the Gayatri mantra as the essence of Vedanta.
Essence of Vedas. You can say Vedanta, that's same, nothing wrong.
And it's translated in various Ramakrishna books. I wondered if you would translate it off the top of your head now.
If we translate
The Gayatri mantra.
now.
Now.
Oh yes, the Gayatri that is normally mentioned here is, it is called Surya Gayatri or Savitur Gayatri. In the Taittiriya Mantra Kosha published from Madras Math, you come across different Gayatri mantras. This particular Gayatri mantra is called Savitur Gayatri. It begins Tat Savituhu Varenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Dhiyo Yona Prajotaya. This is the mantra. Now, Om Tat Savitur Varenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Dhiyo Yona Prajotaya. Let that teja, the spiritual splendor, take me towards my spiritual goal, protect me. That spiritual splendor, teja, which comes from the eternal source of light and knowledge, that is Savita, means Surya, which is supreme, which is always auspicious. Let that supreme spiritual splendor take me forward inspire me, give me eternal spiritual knowledge. That's the meaning.
Thank you, Swami.
The particular Gayatri, I have given just a very, very elementary translation. There are books, whole books written on this particular Gayatri. This Gayatri is called Savitu Gayatri, which is really a part of Vedic Scripture, Rigveda mantra. And there are many other Gayatris which are framed after this particular mantra.
Swami, how many Gayatris are like this, Swami?
Total there are 12 Gayatris.
And they all are addressing to the sun?
Now, other Gayatris are framed after this. This is very similar to Devi Gayatri, Krishna Gayatri, different Gayatris.
Oh, I see. With different deities.
They are different for different deities. In subsequent millennia they formulated different Gayatris. But the real, when you talk about Gayatri mantra, that Gayatri is a prayer to Savitri. Savitri is the spiritual splendor, which is the most auspicious meter, because in Sanskrit, Vedic Sanskrit, there are many meters, metrical form, the formulation of verses in there is a precise order in which words should be formulated. So Gayatri meter is supposed to be the most auspicious, most sublime. So Gayatri is supposed to be the essence of Vedas. Vedas are very, very unwieldy, very huge. Vedas contain descriptions of rituals, prayers to different deities, gods and goddesses, and innumerable other topics, and also the highest spiritual truths also. But Gayatri, if you utter Gayatri with great care, Shraddha, then it is supposed to be equal to reading the whole Vedas. And Om itself constitutes the essence of Gayatri, because Omkara is uttered before Gayatri mantra and also after Gayatri mantra. So Om, it is called Pranava, it's called. That is the essence of all. Om includes three letters, A, U and Ma, which are the three letter formulations. One is pronounced with closed mouth, the other is with open mouth, the other is with middle. So all the speech systems, syllables, sound systems belong to this category. It's an important topic of discussion in Sanskrit grammar and also in Vedic philosophy. We will discuss it.
Swami mentioned Savita, right?
Savita is named Surya, it means sun. Sun doesn't mean the sun that you see above. Sun is a symbol of knowledge. Sun is a symbol of knowledge. We come to know something only when there is light. So light is that reveals everything. Light reveals itself, light reveals other things also. Without light, the very idea of form cannot be there. So sun doesn't mean just the star, the star known as sun. It means the symbol or the concept of light or knowledge.
Swamiji, is there a difference between repeating the Gayatri mantra and the mantra of the Ishtadevata? Like, do you do it together, or does one do something different than the other?
Well, for specific instructions, you have to follow the instructions of your guru. And generally speaking, Gayatri mantra can be uttered. For individual spiritual seekers, you have to follow the instructions that you are given by your teacher. That's a tradition. But Gayatri can be repeated after proper, I mean, after taking bath, after observing all this, Gayatri can be repeated. It is supposed to have a great effect on intellectual and spiritual awakening.
And purification of the mind.
Yes,
and heart.
yes.
Thank you.
Swami, is all the other mantras framed from the Gayatri mantra?
Now Gayatri, we can't say they are all derived from Gayatri mantra, but Gayatri is the most sublime and the most sacred of the mantras. Now, here we are not talking about mantras that teachers give to their disciples. Generally speaking, Gayatri is the most popular and the most sacred Vaidika mantras. Vedas you find many mantras, Gayatri. And it also is the name of a meter, and the meter also is auspicious. So that's the idea.
Swami, what is this meter, Swami? I don't understand the concept of it.
Oh,
I know other people may have understood.
Meter means vrutta. There are different books written in Sanskrit. Vrutta means Vrutta Ratnakara also. Means the metrical form. Those who, in Sanskrit tradition, there are different forms of meters, formations of words, formations of sounds, formations of there is a very precise mathematical laws are there. So many sounds, so many pictures. That's in English also. There is free verse in English, and also there are established meters also. So yes.
So in the cultural heritage of India, that wonderful reference book, there are explanations of these concepts that we are asking about. Isn't that true? And if you want to get into the scholarship side of it, you would read that kind of book. But if you want to understand the modern Ramakrishna Vedanta, you would need to read Swamiji and get the idea of the practical meaning of mantras and so on. Isn't that true?
Swamiji has given an interpretation in modern English as an introduction to many of these topics. But Swamiji also has exhorted that we must go deeper into original sources, depending upon our interest and aptitude. Not that everyone should go there. Depends upon the aptitude and taste. But Swamiji's volumes constitute a wonderful, a masterful introduction to the subject. That's true. But those who want to study more, they can study more. So it's a very modern and very rational introduction to these subjects.
Swami, what is the importance of all this wondered with this 101 times?
These are auspicious figures, 101, 108. Most probably because Upanishads, most important. The most important Upanishads are 10 Upanishads, and going beyond that, if you include some other important Upanishads, but not the most important, then you can extend to 108. So 108 is supposed to be an auspicious number because of this connection with the 108 Upanishads. And also from ancient times, the Vedic rishis used to use the beads, the garlands, for counting the beads. Normally they used to use this garland with 108 beads. It has become auspicious. That's all.
Swami, this Gospel, it's very kind of easy to read and keep reading through it. Is there a way to read it more deeply, that is, kind of get more deeper understanding into it? I mean, is there some things that you would suggest?
Yes. Swami Vivekanandaji Maharaj exposition of the Gospel, now available in English language, 1 or 2 volumes. They are the most exhaustive commentary on the Gospel.
What's the name, Swami? Swami Buddhish?
That Swamiji was the
Buddhishananda?
president of Ramakrishna Order, Swami Vivekanandaji. So his books are originally in Bengali but translated in English, are available. They are very good
Exposition of
the
Gospel.
Gospel. Yes. But Gospel itself is very exhaustive. Gospel, see, we often sometimes when Sri Ramakrishna refers to everyday life situations, we delude ourselves into thinking it is not abstract enough. It is very wrong. Sri Ramakrishna is very deep and very profound.
Yes, that's true.
Very profound. In fact, many of the highest Vedantic truths, which normally scholars argue about, are presented by Sri Ramakrishna in very simple language in the context of everyday life situations. Just for example, I'm giving an example. In our tradition, Vedantic tradition, there used to be a lot of confrontations, polemical or dialectical conflicts between different schools of Vedanta, especially during the post-Shankarite period, from around 9th, 10th century onwards. Dvaita, Visishtadvaita, Advaita, or maybe in modern times, Christianity, Vedanta, Islam, Buddhism, Savoism, Judaism, and so on. Now, Sri Ramakrishna says just simple, you see, he says Yatoma Tatwamayanandaji. Yes, there are as many parts as there are views, but truth is one. Veda, this is an ancient Vedic statement. Indram Mitram Varunam Aktiraku Adho Divyasa Suparno Gurutman Ekam Sadvipra Bhagudha Vadanti Agnim Yamamatharishwanamaku. The ancient Vedic statement. It comes in the Rigveda Samhita 164 Sutta. Now, it means people call different names, but the reality is one. It's a long, very famous mantra. Sri Ramakrishna says, you go to a pond, you drink water, you call it water if you speak English. If you speak French, you use a French word. If you use a whatever language, Russian, you use a Russian word, but water is the same. Now just imagine, sometimes when we read this, oh, this is simple. We feel that when we understand easily, it should be very, very simple. If we don't understand very clearly, it should be very profound. That's very wrong. Sometimes we feel that way. If something is stated in very simple language, we think it's very simple, very superficial. And if we cannot understand, if it needs a lot of explanation, it should be very profound. It cannot be that way. So, the simple Vedic statement, Sri Ramakrishna puts in simple language. You go to an elephant, this blind men seeing the elephant, all these parables are supreme examples.
Swami, does one need, though, some background to understand the depth of the simplicity? Some other sort of reference points so you don't take it too simply?
Well, I think when suppose you want to write an article or a book, perhaps those source books may be of some help. Or if you want to teach, depending upon the audience. But for one's own understanding, we don't have to go through metaphysical, the original source books, not necessary. But there are many who may think that this is a new idea. For them, you should remind these are all ancient Vedic truths. In fact, that's the greatness of Sri Ramakrishna. Swami Vivekananda himself says, the Sri Ramakrishna's teachings are the most sublime commentary on the Vedantic teachings in modern times. Many of modern ideas that we use in interreligious dialogue, all you find in the gospel. Everyone should try to understand the deeper spiritual truths of his own, her own religious tradition without bothering much about externals. Very simple. All these you find. And mind you, Sri Ramakrishna spoke all these words in the 1880s. Yam listened to Sri Ramakrishna only for about 4 years, more than
3-4 years.
just about 4 years. They all recorded. Sri Ramakrishna had taught for so many years, but Yam came only in 1882. Still so much.
Aren't Sri Ramakrishna's teachings also found in the great master, in the reminiscences of Swami Shivananda, and so on? And so we shouldn't think that the gospel is the only source of Sri Ramakrishna's teachings.
That's true. Gospel is not the only source, and we have no way to find out what all Sri Ramakrishna taught to other great visitors who came to him before 1882. But at the same time, many of the direct disciples had close contact with Yam, and they used to go to his place. Many of them were recruited, many of them were asked to go to Belur Math and Sri Ramakrishna by Yam. Yam himself became a great source of inspiration for the young men who were studying in colleges to go to Sri Ramakrishna. So they have learned from him. But the glory of the book is, it is a complete record of what all he heard. Many of the prominent personalities that Yam refers to became well known. For example, Dr. Sarkar, he is a very prominent figure in the history of modern medicine in India.
Oh, is that so?
Yes, he himself is a very prominent, one of the pioneers of modern medicine in India. Dr. Sarkar, yes. Yes, so Keshav Chandra Sen was a reformer, social reformer, but towards the end, he became a great devotee of Mother. So you can imagine, he started as a kind of rebel social reformer and ended up being a devotee of Mother. So,
Swami, one thing which astonishes me, that first time man goes there, according to what you read, he sits there and he gets that spiritual food or awakening, right? And so this means that if, let's say, any other person goes there, they also get that awakening, or they get the same feeling, or it would be different from different people.
No, that's a very important question. If Sri Ramakrishna, if anybody who went to Sri Ramakrishna could learn, could get a new life, could start a new chapter in their life, then hundreds of people came to Sri Ramakrishna. In fact, there was one aged man living close to Sri Ramakrishna,
Right.
in the Hazra.
Yeah.
Now he was a devotee of God, but not of a highly exalted type. So how do you explain that? So not everybody. So very often, Yam's mindset reached that level of spiritual evolution. Then only he could learn from Sri Ramakrishna what he wanted to learn. Again, the tragedy of domestic life, domestic problems, it creates a terrible condition of the mind which drives away all desires, all obsessions and attachment to his worldly relationship. That creates the right condition for one to turn to spiritual life. Not for everyone. People go and drink and to forget everything. They do that. Instead of going to a great saint and sage, many people may go and drink to forget their domestic worries. But in Yam's case, when he heard from Sri Ramakrishna, it was the beginning of a new life for him. So he was also fit for it. His mind was ready for it. So he had himself done a lot of spiritual practices, either in previous life or in his own life, present life, to become spiritually fit, to receive from Sri Ramakrishna a new spiritual.
Swami, what happened to those people who came and just received the service from Sri Ramakrishna? Like I remember one of the case in Gospel written, there is a person by the name Ram who entered the Sri Ramakrishna room, and all these devotees were sitting. He comes and sits next to the Swami's Sri Ramakrishna's cot and say, okay, prepare smoke for me. And Sri Ramakrishna hurry, and all the devotees were singing, and they help him prepare the smoke, and Sri Ramakrishna very respectfully give him the smoke. He have the smoke, he say, okay, thank you priest, and he goes away out of the room. So, and that surprised me. Totally.
You know, Sri Ramakrishna himself gives very funny incidents. One day in the Ganga, there was a priest. A priest normally used to be very polite, but that day this priest was talking to Sri Ramakrishna. How are you, priest? Everything's all right. Then Sri Ramakrishna that day he had got 1 rupee.
He got some money.
So he says a frog that becomes so proud that it looks up, and suddenly an elephant is passing through. The frog had something had got a good bait, So this happens to human beings. Such funny episodes which gives a glimpse into human mind, the ecosystem. You find many such events explained in the Gospel. So any other discussion?
Those people who met Sri Ramakrishna were pretty lucky though, even if they were scoundrels.
Some of them, that's true, but some of them, like Girishchandra Ghosh, for example, he had many great qualities, though he was not what you normally understand as a spiritual seeker. He was a drunkard, but he went to Sri Ramakrishna and he had some spiritual aspiration because he was writing dramas on Pauranic characters or saintly mythological characters and so on. So he had some spiritual inkling, no doubt. But then he was a drunkard. And when he talked to Sri Ramakrishna, he was very outspoken. He did not say that he will stop drinking next day onwards. He said that he can't give word that he will utter the name of God in the morning or evening, because he can't, both drunkards and also highly elevated souls, both of them transcend time. He won't know when he was going to get up in the morning, what time he is going to sleep. When Sri Ramakrishna asked him to take the name of God the morning and evening, he did not say he will do that, because he knew he would not be able to do that. So as a sincere person. So that sincerity, that truthfulness, Sri Ramakrishna utilized. So with that instrument, he elevated him into a saint. So he had some great spiritual qualities. Many of these people, many of the so-called degenerated people, downtrodden people, morally downtrodden people, they may have some outstanding merits and qualities. We sometimes become
Critical.
yes, which open a new life for them. That's just Sri Ramakrishna could transform him. If he had said, well, tomorrow onwards, I will do as you have advised, but he'll never do that again. There will be no change for him. But he was sincere and honest. He told he can't give word, he can't promise. So Sri Ramakrishna understood this man is sincere. That sincerity is a great quality for every spiritual seeker. One and the most difficult obstacle in spiritual life is not external scenario, but double-mindedness. The Sri Ramakrishna makes that point very clear. In Bengali, in Sanskrit, Saralada means it could mean integrity, honesty, truthfulness, many things put together. And Vyakulata means earnestness, simplicity and earnestness. So, highly skilled diplomats cannot become spiritual personalities. Because diplomacy means you are creating new artificial layers on your mind. Our purpose is to reduce the layers, external layers. It's only one layer. So, even Girishchandra Ghosh had this great quality. He had this quality of integrity and simplicity. That's what Sri Ramakrishna used to emphasize again and again. It's very often our doubts are not always rational. In spiritual life, there is one principle. Once you enter that, many of these doubts won't arise. Many of these doubts remain because we are trying to rationally analyze something which cannot be rationally analyzed. That's the problem. In spiritual life, once we enter, as Sri Ramakrishna says, you jump into the pond or the well, or somebody may push you, or you gradually walk into it. Whatever may be, you should take bath. But sitting on the bank of the pond and talking about what is going to happen to me if I take bath, that won't take us anywhere. That's what Sri Ramakrishna says. Some who enter, take a plunge. Some of his emphatic statements are very, very relevant in spiritual life. It is true that doubts are natural for a very sincere soul. But beyond the limit, doubts themselves become a great liability. Because we are trying to intellectually analyze and completely understand something which cannot be intellectually analyzed and understood. That's what Sri Ramakrishna says. You take a plunge somehow. Like somebody may push you into water. You gradually walk into the river. Whatever may be. That's the idea. So, thank you. Om Tava Kathamritam Tapta Jivanam Kavibhirididam Kalmashabham Sravanamangalam Simadatam Bhuvigranantiti Bhurita Janaha. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.